In the summer of 1945, as the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki still smoldered, the world stood on the edge of an even darker possibility. Few outside the highest circles of the U.S. government and the Manhattan Project knew that a third atomic bomb was already in preparation. The weapon was not a concept or a plan, it was real, tangible, and nearly ready to be assembled. Its plutonium core, the very heart of its destructive power, was being readied at the Los Alamos laboratory, scheduled for completion around August 19th, just days after Japan's second devastation. The decision to use the atomic bomb had not been a one-time event. Within the War Department and the offices of President Harry S. Truman, there existed a production timeline that anticipated a continuing series of atomic attacks should Japan refuse unconditional surrender. This was not an empty threat. The Manhattan Project had reached a stage of momentum where new bomb cores were entering the assembly pipeline every few days. The destruction of Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th were only the beginning of what could have become a systematic atomic bombing campaign across the Japanese mainland. At Los Alamos, scientists and military officers worked under intense pressure, balancing exhaustion with the urgency of war. The third bomb's components were being tested, its explosive lenses calibrated, and its delivery logistics prepared. It was to be another plutonium implosion device, similar to the Fat Man bomb that leveled Nagasaki. The only question remaining was where and when it would be dropped, and whether Japan would surrender before it left American soil. After the smoke cleared over Nagasaki, the machinery of war did not stop. Inside the U.S. War Department, discussions continued as if a third detonation was inevitable. President Harry S. Truman, who had authorized the first two atomic strikes, now faced a moment that would define the moral boundary of modern warfare. Intelligence reports showed Japan was on the brink of collapse, yet there was no formal surrender. Military planners insisted that only overwhelming force would compel the Japanese leadership to yield. The atomic bomb, in their view, was the final instrument of total victory. The question quickly turned to where the next bomb would fall. Tokyo, Japan's political and symbolic heart, emerged as the primary target under consideration. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, both selected partly for their military and industrial importance, Tokyo represented the center of imperial power, the home of Emperor Hirohito himself. However, by August 1945, the city had already been devastated by months of conventional firebombing that had killed over 100,000 civilians and leveled vast districts. For some advisors, another atomic strike there would be redundant. For others, it was the ultimate message: the war could end only when the emperor's city was reduced to ashes. Truman hesitated. Reports of the horrific destruction in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were only beginning to reach Washington in full detail. First-hand accounts and photographs revealed levels of suffering and devastation that went far beyond the expectations of military planners. Truman's conscience and the counsel of some of his advisors began to shift. Secretary of War Henry Stimson urged restraint, warning that further use of atomic bombs might stain America's moral standing in the post-war world. Still, preparations continued. The third bomb was scheduled to be ready for delivery around August 9th. Orders circulated through the 509th Composite Group, the same unit that had carried out the first two missions, indicating that another strike could be launched as soon as the weather and military conditions allowed. Truman's decision window was narrowing, and the course of history hung on whether Japan would surrender before the third bomb left the ground. In the days following the bombing of Nagasaki, the United States did not pause to celebrate or mourn. Within the laboratories at Los Alamos and the offices of the Manhattan Engineer District, work continued as if another target had already been assigned. The momentum of the Manhattan Project, a vast scientific and industrial effort spanning 3 continents, was almost impossible to halt. Every process, from uranium enrichment at Oak Ridge to plutonium production at Hanford, was running at full capacity. For the scientists and officers involved, the war was not yet over, and their orders remained unchanged: prepare the next bomb. The third weapon, sometimes referred to informally as the Third Core, was another plutonium implosion device like Fat Man. By August 10th, the metallic plutonium core was nearly ready, undergoing final tests and inspections at Los Alamos. The high-explosive components, detonators, and electronic triggers were being assembled in parallel. Technical reports indicate that the core itself was expected to leave New Mexico for Tinian Island, the staging point for the atomic missions, by August 12 or 13. Once at Tinian, it would take roughly a week to finalize assembly and readiness. The target date for delivery and potential detonation was set for August 19, just 10 days after Nagasaki. Inside the 509th Composite Group's base on Tinian, the crews were briefed for continued operations. Colonel Paul Tibbets, who had piloted the Enola Gay over Hiroshima, oversaw preparations for further missions. Ground crews maintained the specially modified B-29 bombers, and new atomic units were being trained in handling the fragile and dangerous components. The secrecy remained absolute. Only a small circle of officers knew that another bomb was imminent. For many, the war still seemed far from over. Japan had not yet surrendered, and the U.S. was preparing to invade the home islands under the massive operation codenamed Downfall, expected to begin in late. Military planners feared that an invasion could cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and millions of Japanese casualties. The atomic bomb, in this context, appeared to be the final solution to prevent a catastrophic land war. At the same time, communications from Tokyo painted a more complex picture. Japan's government was in turmoil. After the shock of Hiroshima, the Japanese War Council had been divided between those advocating continued resistance and those recognizing defeat as inevitable. When Nagasaki was destroyed, Emperor Hirohito himself intervened, an unprecedented act for a divine monarch. He urged his ministers to accept the Allied terms of surrender, citing the unbearable suffering of his people and the new destructive power that made further fighting meaningless. But even as the emperor's voice echoed in secret meetings, coded messages intercepted by U.S. intelligence suggested that hardliners within the Japanese military were preparing to resist, potentially through a coup to prevent surrender. In Washington, this intelligence was being analyzed hour by hour. President Truman and his advisors watched the situation unfold with a mix of impatience and anxiety. The plutonium core at Los Alamos could not simply be left idle. The production cycle was continuous. Reports from General Leslie Groves indicated that by September 1945, several more cores would be ready for assembly. The United States was on the brink of possessing a small arsenal of atomic weapons, capable of obliterating one city after another every few days. To many military strategists, this was the leverage that would force Japan to yield unconditionally or compel the Soviet Union to respect American dominance in the Pacific. However, the pressure on Truman was mounting from multiple sides. In the State Department, some diplomats warned that the world's moral opinion would turn against America if atomic bombs continued to fall. The Vatican, the Red Cross, and even some U.S. allies expressed quiet unease over the unprecedented devastation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Within the U.S. Army Air Forces, General Carl Spaatz and others questioned whether another strike was even necessary. Yet General Groves and several senior officers argued that failing to use the bomb again would waste its psychological impact. If Japan did not surrender soon, they reasoned, a third demonstration of atomic power, perhaps over Tokyo, would end all hesitation. By August 14, the situation reached its breaking point. Japan had secretly communicated its willingness to surrender, provided that the emperor's position would be preserved. In the United States, the proposal sparked heated debate. Some viewed it as acceptable, others as defiance of the unconditional surrender policy. Meanwhile, the third bomb remained on standby. Its shipment to the Pacific was being delayed only by Truman's personal order. At Los Alamos, scientists waited for final instructions. A telegram stood ready to authorize the core's transfer to Tinian. If Japan's surrender proved to be a stalling tactic, the third bomb would be dispatched immediately. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito spoke to his people through a crackling radio broadcast, the first time the Japanese public had ever heard his voice. His message was clear. Though wrapped in formal language, the war was over. He referred to a new and most cruel bomb that had brought untold suffering, and he called on his subjects to accept peace. That broadcast froze every plan in its tracks. The third atomic bomb was never shipped. The core remained at Los Alamos, where it became known among scientists as the Demon Core after causing 2 fatal accidents during later experiments. The countdown to August 19 was stopped by the emperor's decision, a single intervention that spared Japan from a third atomic catastrophe. While the world absorbed the shock of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the vast and complex machinery of the Manhattan Project continued to turn. Few outside a small circle of officials knew that by August 1945, the United States had created not only 2 bombs, but an entire production system designed to manufacture atomic weapons on an industrial scale. The project's scientists, engineers, and military overseers had achieved something unprecedented in human history, a functioning pipeline capable of producing a new nuclear weapon every few days. The scale, secrecy, and intensity of this operation were beyond imagination. At the core of this system were 3 principal sites: Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where uranium was enriched through massive electromagnetic and gaseous diffusion plants; Hanford, Washington, where plutonium was bred in nuclear reactors and chemically separated in immense radiochemical facilities; and Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the bomb designs were conceived, tested, and assembled. Each site was a self-contained city of secrecy, employing tens of thousands of workers who often had little idea what they were contributing to. By mid-1945, their combined output had reached a steady rhythm, enough fissile material to build a new atomic core roughly every 3 to 4 days. This pace was not accidental. It was part of General Leslie Groves's strategic vision. As the military head of the Manhattan Project, Groves had insisted that once the atomic bomb was proven successful, it should be produced continuously until Japan surrendered. He envisioned a campaign of successive atomic blows, a relentless demonstration of the United States' new power. The goal was psychological as much as physical, to crush Japan's will to fight and to show the world, including the Soviet Union, the dominance of American science and industry. At Los Alamos, however, not everyone shared that confidence. Many scientists were already expressing deep unease about what they had unleashed. The sense of accomplishment that had filled the laboratory after the Trinity test in July had quickly turned into dread once the news from Hiroshima arrived. Reports of shadows burned into walls, of people vaporized in an instant, and of lingering radiation sickness filtered back through military channels. Some physicists, including James Franck and Leo Szilard, had already warned that the atomic bomb's use on cities would open a moral abyss from which humanity might never recover. They had proposed a demonstration explosion on an uninhabited area instead, a proposal rejected in favor of immediate military deployment. Still, the bomb factories kept operating. The industrial machinery of war was not easily stopped. Every new batch of plutonium bred in the Hanford reactors added to the growing stockpile. Shipping manifests show that by late August and early September 1945, several more cores were expected to be completed and ready for assembly. If Japan had not surrendered, it is entirely plausible that by the end of 1945, the United States could have had at least half a dozen operational atomic bombs, enough to devastate Japan's remaining major cities: Kyoto, Yokohama, Osaka, and perhaps even Tokyo itself. In Washington, these capabilities fed into strategic debates about the post-war world. The atomic bomb had given the United States an unparalleled weapon, but it also introduced a new form of diplomacy, one defined by deterrence and fear. Even before the war officially ended, Truman's advisors began to discuss the implications of atomic monopoly. Could the United States use its new power to shape the peace, contain Soviet expansion, and define the balance of power in the coming decades? This thinking laid the foundations of what would soon become the nuclear age, the beginning of an arms race that would dominate global politics for generations. Yet in the days immediately after Nagasaki, these discussions were still theoretical. On the ground, the focus remained operational: finish the next bomb, prepare the next mission, keep the production line running. The scientists at Los Alamos, under the leadership of J. Robert Oppenheimer, found themselves in a strange duality. On one hand, they had succeeded beyond measure in achieving what many thought impossible. On the other, they had witnessed the consequences of that success in the form of entire cities annihilated in seconds. Within the laboratory, an air of unease settled over the once celebratory atmosphere. Some scientists requested transfers or resignations. Others, compelled by duty or scientific curiosity, continued their work. The third bomb's plutonium core, still at Los Alamos, became a haunting reminder of what might have been, a weapon built but never used, poised forever on the edge between history and catastrophe. Meanwhile, the military began cataloging what remained of the project's wartime assets. Groves insisted that the atomic program remain under strict military control. He feared that if production were halted or placed under civilian oversight, the United States would lose its advantage. Truman, however, would soon move in the opposite direction. By 1946, the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission would take over, marking the transition of nuclear weapons from wartime emergency to permanent national policy. In that brief period between Nagasaki and the dawn of the post-war order, the Manhattan Project was at its peak efficiency, a vast machine capable of turning theory into destruction on a scale no one had imagined possible. The third bomb was only the first in a line of many waiting to follow. The surrender of Japan stopped that chain reaction, not just militarily, but morally. Had Hirohito not intervened when he did, the production schedule ensured that the atomic age would have begun not with 2 detonations, but with many more, each one erasing another city from the map of Japan. When Emperor Hirohito's voice broke through the static of Japan's national radio on August 15, 1945, an empire that had fought for over a decade finally fell silent. His words were veiled in archaic court language, but their meaning was unmistakable. Japan would surrender. For millions who listened in disbelief, it was the end of a war that had consumed Asia and the Pacific. For the United States, it meant victory and an abrupt halt to a chain of events that was already in motion. The third atomic bomb, its core ready and awaiting shipment, would never fly. Its target, likely Tokyo, was spared by a decision that arrived just in time. In the weeks that followed, the world's understanding of what had transpired in Hiroshima and Nagasaki deepened. American military photographers and Japanese doctors documented the aftermath. Cities flattened into fields of ash, children suffering from burns that never healed, survivors dying from a mysterious sickness later identified as radiation poisoning. The scale of human suffering challenged even the victors to comprehend what had been unleashed. President Truman, briefed in detail by his aides, ordered that no more atomic bombs be dropped without his explicit approval. The production of additional weapons continued for testing and research, but the era of wartime nuclear use ended before a third city joined the list. The fate of the third plutonium core became a quiet legend within the halls of Los Alamos. It remained in storage for months, used in critical experiments to measure the properties of nuclear chain reactions. In these tests, 2 physicists, Harry Daghlian and Louis Slotin, lost their lives after accidental criticality incidents. The core that might have destroyed another city instead claimed 2 scientists in peacetime, earning its grim nickname, the Demon Core. It was eventually melted down and recycled into other nuclear experiments, its destructive potential finally dispersed. Yet the symbolism lingered. That small sphere of plutonium represented the razor's edge between total annihilation and the restraint that barely prevailed. In the broader political world, the existence of the third bomb and the production capacity behind it had far-reaching consequences. Although the details remained classified for years, the Soviets were quick to understand that the United States possessed more than 2 atomic weapons. Stalin's spies had already infiltrated parts of the Manhattan Project, and intelligence reaching Moscow in late 1945 confirmed that the Americans were capable of building more bombs quickly. This realization accelerated the Soviet nuclear program, setting in motion the Cold War's most defining contest, the nuclear arms race. Inside the United States, debates erupted over how the new weapon should be governed. The immediate wartime secrecy gave way to moral questioning and public anxiety. Scientists who had once celebrated the triumph of physics now feared what their discovery meant for civilization. Figures such as Oppenheimer, Szilard, and Einstein called for international control of atomic energy, warning that a world armed with nuclear weapons could not survive another conflict. Truman, facing a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape, approved the creation of the Atomic Energy Commission in 1946 to place nuclear research under civilian oversight. But the military never fully relinquished its role, and the United States continued testing and refining nuclear weapons in the years that followed. The third bomb thus became more than a weapon that never detonated. It became a symbol of a threshold narrowly avoided. Its readiness revealed how close humanity had come to a new pattern of warfare. Atomic bombardment, not as a singular act but as a sustained campaign. Had Japan delayed surrender by even a week, Tokyo might have been obliterated. Had the emperor's voice been silenced by the attempted coup that nearly unfolded on the night of August 14th, the history of the atomic age would have begun with 3 ruined cities instead of 2. The world that emerged after 1945, divided, cautious, and haunted by the bomb, was shaped as much by what didn't happen as by what did. In the years after the war, the story of the third bomb remained buried in classified files and scattered technical documents. Only decades later did historians piece together the full picture: the production schedule at Hanford, the transport orders at Los Alamos, and the strike plans waiting at Tinian. The realization that another atomic attack had been imminent changed the historical understanding of the war's end. It underscored how fragile peace had been and how easily the post-war world might have begun under an even darker cloud. Today, the tale of the third bomb stands as a quiet reminder of restraint, an episode in which timing, circumstance, and a single human decision prevented another city's destruction. The power that had been unleashed could not be undone, but for a fleeting moment in August 1945, history paused. The emperor's surrender halted the momentum of total annihilation, sparing millions of lives and preserving the faint possibility that humanity might learn from its own creation. The third bomb never fell, but its shadow shaped the world that followed, a world defined by the knowledge that such a weapon could exist and by the fear that one day it might be used again.